Hey everybody, Matt here for AVC and welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to be installing our Ford Transit Roof Rack 2.0. Let's jump right in. The instructions in this video will apply to any high or medium roof rack, so whatever van you have, follow along with us and you can install this rack at home. Today we're going to be installing a roof rack on a high roof 148 long body van. Included in this kit are 5 crossbars, 2 front blades, 2 rear blades, 1 front fairing, 2 double towers, 6 single towers, 4 compression feet, and 4 baggies of hardware, 1 for each step. We also include Loctite with our kit because now all of our hardware is stainless. The tools and supplies you're going to need to provide are some butyl tape to seal in between our tower and the roof of the van, some lap sealant to seal over the top of our hardware for a waterproof seal, some isopropyl alcohol to prepare our surfaces on the vehicle, some primer if we have to cut any metal to fit our hardware in, some sort of way to open the metal if we need to do that. This is a little nibbler tool that we picked up on Amazon. It's a pretty affordable tool and works really well for DIY. We're gonna need some hex keys or Allen keys that are gonna fit 1/4 20 and 5/16 hardware. I grabbed a socket set just so that I have all the tools needed. I need tools for 5/16, 1/4 20, and 8mm bolts. I have a caulking gun here to apply my lap sealant. I have some paper towels, gloves, and a little dauber tool here to apply my primer. With that, let's get to work. Before we get to installing our roof rack, there's a little bit of prep work we need to do down here on the ground. The first thing I want to do is going to be wipe the bottom of each of these towers with some isopropyl alcohol. That's going to degrease the bottom of this tower and make sure I have proper adhesion for my butyl tape. Once the bottom of these towers are degreased, I'm going to apply some butyl tape to the bottom of this tower, and that is going to give me a waterproof seal in between my tower and the roof of my van. We're up here on the roof and there's a little bit of prep work we need to do before we can bring our towers to the van. First, we're going to remove the caps here from the factory. And we're going to inspect the threaded inserts from Ford to make sure that they're aligned with the hole. Most of the time they line up, sometimes they don't. If they don't line up, we're going to use our nibbler tool and we're going to open that hole up so we expose our threads. I brought my step 1 hardware with me so I can test out these threads and make sure all my hardware installs nice and easy. So let's go ahead and take our plastic scraper or pretty much anything. We're going to pull off this cap. Okay. And I can just stick that off to the side. And I'm gonna take a look at these threads, and they're pretty darn close. And this is close enough to work. I can thread this in here easily, so I'm not gonna open this hole up any at all. Now I'm gonna move on to every other tower spot on the van, pull off these caps, and inspect my threads. While I'm up here opening up the hardware access points here for my towers, it's a good thing to point out that these other holes are not for hardware. These are wire pass-throughs. So if you need to wire your solar panel, or you need to wire an off-road light or a light bar, something like that, you can open these up and there's a nice opening here to feed wires inside the van. So I've opened up all the holes on my Transit, and this back mounting point does not line up with my hardware. I can't easily thread this in here. In fact, I can't thread it in here at all. So I'm gonna take my nibbler and I'm gonna open up this hole so that I can easily thread my 8mm bolt inside. Now that that hole is opened up and I have some exposed steel, I'm gonna use some primer and prep that surface so I don't have any rust issues in the future. With all of our holes open and ready to accept hardware, ready to prepare our surfaces on the van, just wipe everything down with some isopropyl. Our prep work is done and now we're ready to start our install. This is step 1. I'm here on the driver's side and I have all of my towers laid out in the correct places. And that's going to be a single tower at the very front, a double tower, then 2 single towers here at the back. I've grabbed my step 1 hardware, so that's my 8mm stainless bolts and washers, and I grabbed my anti-seize so I can prepare each bolt. I'm gonna thread my bolt into my washer, I'm gonna apply my Loctite, then I can put my tower in place, insert the bolt into its spot, and hand tighten. With all the towers installed on the driver's side, I'm over here on the passenger and I'm gonna do the same thing. Single tower up front, double tower, 2 single towers in the back. Our towers are all in place, we're ready to move on to step 2. Let's mount these blades. I'm up here at the back of the passenger side and I have the rear blade with me. I've also brought my step 2 baggie of hardware, a 1/2-inch wrench on a ratchet, and a 3/16 Allen key. I'm gonna put on a bolt and a washer in the center of here. I'm gonna put that in the top hole of my tower. Then I'm gonna put on a washer and my nylock on the back and just get that hand tight. Then I'll move to the back. I'll do the same thing on the top of the tower here. Just gonna get all of my hardware arranged first before I start tightening anything down. I can move up here to the front tower, get this in place. Once the top row is in place, I can start with my bottom row. Now with all of my hardware loosely in place, I'm gonna take my blade and I'm gonna slide it forward. I wanna reduce this gap as small as possible because I think it looks really clean. And I can do that right now before I get anything tight. Once it's pressed down and forward, I can go ahead and tighten up the center bolt here. Once that's tight and I'm happy with the placement, I can go through and tighten the rest of my bolts. Our rear blade is in place and I'm ready to move on to my front blade. I like to start with the front set of hardware on the front blade and insert that here. Again, I'm just going to get these hand tight so I can get my position exactly where I want it. So all of my hardware is now on and hand tight. I'm going to slide this blade back towards the back. Where they're almost touching, I'm going to give myself about an 1/8 of an inch gap between those two blades, just so I don't get a contact point or anywhere to wear out. Once that's there, I can go ahead and tighten this bolt up and go through and tighten the rest of my hardware on this side. Now that we're done with the passenger side blade install, we've moved over here to the driver's side. We're going to do the exact same thing we did over on the passenger side. So we're going to start with the center bolt. We're going to start by just hand tightening all of our hardware. The main thing I want you to remember is the way we position this blade. So I positioned it as down as far as I can and as forward as far as I can. And I just want to make sure I match my spacing from left to right. So let's get these fastened, move on to the front blade. So here on my front blade, all of my hardware is in place. I'm going to pull my front blade forward about an 1/8 of an inch so I can match my passenger side and then tighten everything up. With all my blades tightened down, I'm ready to move on to my crossbars. Before I move to my crossbars, I want to add my compression feet here at the front of the van. To do that, I put a little bit of butyl on the bottom of my compression foot. I'm going to mount it with the foot facing out towards the outside, and that's going to sit inside this rain gutter. I'm going to insert it underneath the fairing. Then I'm going to put my hardware in, just like my tower hardware. It's going to go through there. Everything should be nice and tight here. Then when we tighten down this front tower, it's going to compress everything to the front of the van and take out any kind of wobble on the front of our rack. Now that we have both the front compression feet on, let's move on and add compression feet to the back of our rack. Now this is a new addition for our version 2. Because we extended the back of this rack out over the back of the van, we wanted to make sure we had good stable planting of that rack here at the rear of the vehicle. So the same thing, I'm just going to put my pressure foot into place, put my hardware on, we'll tighten this down. Then as we tighten our tower into the van, it's going to compress this against the roof and make everything nice and tight. Now that our blades are mounted up on the van, we're ready to move on to step 3. We are going to be preparing our fairing and mounting it to a crossbar, so we're ready to install it up on the van. To do that, we're going to take our 1/4-20 fastener and a washer, and we're going to insert them through the fairing. Then we'll take our stainless T-nut here, and we'll spin it on just enough to get it started, but leaving enough room to slide our crossbar into place. Let's go ahead and fill up the rest of the holes with that hardware. Now all of our hardware is in place and we can slide our crossbar onto the fairing. Now we want to center our crossbar onto the fairing. Should leave us about a 1/4 of an inch gap here, and then we can tighten up all of our hardware. Our fairing is now mounted to our crossbar. Let's get back to the roof. Now that our fairing is prepped, we're ready to move on to step 4, mounting our crossbars. Now crossbar placement is going to be very dependent on you and your build. I'm going to be mounting one of my crossbars here at the very front of my rack. And because I'm doing solar, my second crossbar is going to go at the very front of my rear blade. We're going to use our 1/4-20 hardware. We're going to install one side at a time and just move our way down the rack. Because we're installing stainless hardware, I'm going to be using my Loctite. And for now, I'm just going to get things started hand tight. Once all the parts are in place, then I can come through and tighten everything up to final. Here at the back of the van, I'm putting up crossbars, and I just want to talk about the new slot profiles on our version 2 rack. You'll notice that we have small slots and large slots. The small slots are spaced every 12 inches. So if you want to use our deck panels and fill out part of your rack with a deck, go ahead and use these small slots so that all the spacing is set for you. If you want to use the larger slots, you can mount anything you want. We just added a lot more versatility to this rack. So today, I'm going to add my crossbar at the very back of my rack. I'm going to skip 2, and I'm going to put my second crossbar here. When I get all of my deck system going on, I'll start adding crossbars and decking as I need. All right, all of our crossbars are on. We have things roughly tight, but nothing's locked down all the way yet. Our last step is going to be mount our fairing. So the fairing goes in this front diagonal spot, and this part is best to do if you have a friend with you. I'm going to do it solo here. You can follow along. So I got both my hardware sets prepped, and I'm going to get one of these in place here. And I'm going to brace myself on the fairing and use this front crossbar to support my hand. And I'm just going to thread this on lightly to start. And I like to put the fairing about the middle of this slot. That gives me room to adjust on the other side and get my positioning exactly where I want it. So I'm going to snug things up on this side, but I'm going to plan to come back to this side after I get that side tightened up all the way and get any final adjustment in place. I'm getting the last bits of this fairing tight, and I just wanted to give you a couple pointers. I got things started by myself here. I got everything hand tight as close as it would, and just enough so that the fairing wasn't shifting around by itself. Once I did that, I had a couple of times jumping back and forth across the sides of the van, and what I ended up doing is just sliding the entire assembly up until it touches the compression foot on the inside of the rack here. And that gave me a nice gap here at the bottom of the van. It also gives me even spacing on both sides of the rack here, and I'm pretty happy with the way it's turning out. So I'm just gonna leave it there. I could adjust a little bit tighter to the roof if I needed to, but I know from experience that this is not gonna give me any wind noise when I'm driving along, and so this is a good position for it. So now I can get these bolts tightened up into place, go through, tighten the rest of my crossbar bolts, and while I'm up here, once all these crossbars are nice and tight, I can get a final tightening on my towers to the van. Now that the distance is set across the van, we can tighten these towers against the roof of the vehicle, and it's gonna set that distance perfectly at 60.25. It's also gonna start to compress these compression feet into the front of the van, which is gonna keep the front of this roof rack very stable. After we tighten up these 8mm bolts, our install is going to be complete. Now, since we use butyl in between our tower and the roof of our van, we want to let that butyl smush out a little bit, and we're going to keep adding tension to these bolts. So over the next 15 minutes, we're just going to go around the van and tighten things up slowly and let that butyl seep out. Once we're really happy with the way everything's tightened up, we're going to add our lap sealant over the top of all of those bolts and around the edges of our towers. That's going to be our final weatherproof seal that's going to protect our van from water intrusion. Now, if you have any questions about this install, please hit us up in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.